The trade conflict between the United States and practically the rest of the world has taken a sudden turnaround courtesy of U.S. President Donald Trump. The president now says that he's suspending tariffs on most nations for the next 90 days except China. Wall Street is soaring on the news. You can see the graph right there. It speaks for itself. Shares immediately jumped more than 6% on the news. Markets had been falling sharply for days, expecting a global trade war. But that now seems to be off the table, at least for the next 90 days. The White House has been commenting on this announcement from the U.S. president. Take a listen.
As you all know, the president just put out a statement announcing an additional tariff on China. The tariff on China will now go up to 125% because China imprudently decided to retaliate against the United States. And as I said at the podium yesterday, when you punch at the United States of America, President Trump is going to punch back harder. In that same vein, we have had more than 75 countries from around the world reach out to President Trump and his team here at the White House to negotiate better trade deals for the American worker. We have been overwhelmed with the amount of requests from countries around the world. I'll let the Secretary speak to that. We will continue with the tailor-made negotiations that I spoke about yesterday. In the meantime, there will be a 90-day pause on the reciprocal tariffs as these negotiations are ongoing, and the tariff level will be brought down to a universal 10% tariff.
All right, that announcement coming from the White House in just the last couple of minutes. I want to cross over now to our correspondent, Janelle Dumalaon. She's in Washington covering this developing story for us. So, Janelle, this is a big change. Walk us through what we are seeing here. I guess walk us through what we are not seeing for China.
Well, never a dull moment here, Brent, I can tell you that. And you've outlined quite a bit of it already, but just to reiterate, there will be a 90-day pause on the reciprocal tariffs that were meant to be implemented this week, that were announced last week, that reciprocal tariff will be brought down to a baseline level for all affected countries except China to 10%. And let me tell you, for that part, there was a bit of confusion because remember that 10% was the baseline already, and then there were differing reciprocal tariff rates for each sort of country that was thought to make up, that was from a formula derived based on the trade deficit between the U.S. and that country. And then there was a 10% on top of that. So we did not know if that meant that only the 10%, whether that baseline 10% that was originally announced would still apply. But now Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, has confirmed that what the president does mean is that this 10% reciprocal tariff will apply universally to all countries except China. So China, they're adding another 20% to the tariffs that they have already imposed on Chinese imports. So that brings the total up to 124%. And that really tells you that perhaps this trade war is a trade war that is largely concentrated on China.
Okay, and I want to just be clear on this because this is happened just in the last couple of minutes. The 10% base tariff that was applied last week on all imports globally, does that remain?
So it is 10% for everybody. So that is the level that will apply to all countries. So for example, if you are the EU and you had a 20% import tariff applied to your imports, the way we understand it, that was a combination of the 10% reciprocal tariff that was announced and another 10% that was specific to the EU. So now that level will just be at 10%. So that is what I hope that's somewhat clear. We did try to wrap our heads around this just in the last minutes, but this appears to be the message that they are telegraphing.
And also,
so to give another example, perhaps 10 and 10 is not good. If you're Lesotho and you are looking at 10 instead of 50, because if you were Lesotho, the tariff that they calculated for you was 40 plus 10. So now you are looking at 10.
Okay. Yeah, that's clear. So the 10 is going to remain. What has triggered, though, this pause for 90 days? Am I reading it correctly by understanding that Trump has got basically the acknowledgement from these other countries, and they've said, yes, Mr. President, we want to make a deal. We will come and talk to you. Is that what he was hoping to coerce these other economies into doing, and he got what he wanted?
That's certainly what they seem to be telegraphing, right? So you had the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent saying that this was Trump's plan all along, that this was his way of trying to get the countries, the different countries around the world to do what Trump wanted, that over 70 countries have caused the phones to ring off the hook in the White House. But I suppose the question I would have there, Brent, is if that is what they wanted, then why did they not simply say, listen, this is what I am threatening you with, this certain level of tariffs, and you have 90 days to negotiate with me, or they will come into force, if there was space for that 90 days anyway. You know, they could have, if negotiations were what they wanted, they could have offered that with the threat. My guess, and of course, this is not something that I would be able to prove, is that Trump did end up being sensitive to the market reaction. He did end up being sensitive to the reactions of the bigwigs on Wall Street. He did end up being sensitive to the criticism from his inner circle, like Elon Musk. And as such, we are seeing this extraordinary climb down from the White House.
That's what I was going to, let me ask you before we run out of time, Janelle, but in the last week, everyone I've spoke with in the United States has talked about the loss in their investment portfolios, which are tied to their retirement. So everyone, on paper at least, has seen their future plans, their retirement plans cut. Some people have seen things, reduced by 50% or more. And we've been told by the White House that that did not factor into this decision. But that's hard to believe, isn't it?
It is hard to believe. I mean, you had billions and billions of dollars in value being wiped off the stock market. That's really not, an indication that things are going well, that you are handling the economy well. There was a lot of worry from those groups of people that you mentioned with pension funds, with college funds that are sort of tied to the market. But I do want to caution, we are seeing the markets soar on this. We are seeing markets back, we are seeing indices back in the green. But I don't know that these 90 days are enough to tell people, listen, it's all good now. We're back on solid ground. We're back on certain ground. This is something that, this back and forth, this whipsawing, this is something that is going to cause some concern and some uncertainty still.
It's going to cause a lot of investors to feel good about their portfolios today. That we're looking right now, New York Stock Exchange, U.S. stocks up 6% right now. That is a lot of green on the screen, which we have not seen in more than a week now. Janelle Dumalaon in Washington with the latest on this developing story. Janelle, thank you. And here at the big table with me now is my colleague and our China expert, Clifford Coonan. So let's talk about China is the big exception here, and they're going to get new tariffs put on their imports, 124%, as Janelle was saying. Is Trump punishing them for daring to retaliate?
I think he is, definitely. There's that element of it. Part of me sort of thinks that this is kind of how it was planned all along, because that's what a lot of people within the Trump administration, not just the Trump administration, because it's also across the House in the US, wanted stronger tariffs against China because they've created this massive imbalance on trade. And it was always about China. And I think there was some puzzlement when the allies, particularly the allies in the region, whatever about the EU, because that'll be dealt with, I'm sure, down the road, but it'll be an issue further down the road. But with places like Japan and Korea, why they were also being brought in on this, because you think you'd want to keep your allies on side. So there was some puzzlement, but it's a massive blow for China. It's a huge... It's so focused on exports. I mean, there's reports today of containers dumping their containers, the containers of goods into the water, because they don't want to land at a U.S. port.
Well, how does Xi Jinping, how does he explain this to the party, but also to the Chinese people? I mean, you could say up until this moment, he has been arguing, we are not going to back down. We're going to be tough against the American arrogance. But can he really argue that now when the rest of the world is seeing a 90-day reprieve and perhaps an end to these tariffs?
I think he will. In the last few days, in the last few weeks, we've seen this. It's being characterized as a struggle. It's like an old-fashioned communist struggle against the Western imperialists. That's the way it's being characterized among the people. People are talking about how they're ready for even a hot war. We've had all this very martial sounding rhetoric. So it's going to be very, very difficult for him to back down. And in some ways, he doesn't really need to back down because there is sort of broad support now, I think, because it's been characterized as this campaign against what they see as inequalities from the West. But it's going to make it very difficult now when people look around, as you say, and they see Japan and they see Korea and they see that they're not being... They're going to say, well, what is it we've done? And they're going to start asking questions.
Well, what's the strength in being singled out by the United States in Xi Jinping's thinking? I mean, how's he going to sell that?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's very much going to be this rhetoric that they've been using about the struggle, that China is... We're going to hear a lot of talk about the global south. We're going to hear a lot of talk about inequality. They've been running these ads on YouTube showing pictures of people working in sweatshops in the US in horrible conditions.
None of that's really going to hold water now. If in 90 days you've got all these bilateral agreements being made and the tariff story ends there, except for the tariffs on China. I mean,
absolutely. I mean, it's a very strong, it's a big deal, and it's going to be very difficult for him to. But I mean, they have a lot of control, and they really can control society in a way that you don't get in Western countries. So there's a lot of stuff that they can do.
I mean, what can they do now moving forward? There was a lot of talk about concerns that China would unload all of the U.S. treasuries that they own because we've been seeing. The yields go up on U.S. treasuries. Demand has been going down. I mean, is that the nuclear option?
I think it is. And I don't know.
They would hurt themselves, wouldn't they?
Absolutely. They can't really afford to do it. I mean, the manufacturing is worth about $2 trillion, their manufacturing sector. They really need these exports because the economy in China is not doing well. They've got a property crisis. They've got all of these issues that they're dealing with. So I think for them, that would be too much almost. They're going to have to find a way either to negotiate, and very possibly this is all part of some grand deal scheme, as we know, with Mr. Trump.
Or a chat GPT suggestion.
Yeah.
We don't know.
It could be random.
We will see what happens.
Yeah.
Cliff, as always, we appreciate you coming to the studio, appreciate your analysis. Thank you.